career conference for females in tech was taken over by male attendees. Social media clips filmed at the Grace Hopper, the world's largest gathering of women technologists, show men standing in line to meet with recruiters. Some of the male attendees reportedly lied about being non-binary just to get in.
Here we go. The feminists are at it again, and the world is now ending because men have invaded a female space.
You're a dude watching this video. This is a space for women in tech.
Gee, it's not like women have ever tried to force their way into male spaces before, like the NFL, video games, the men's restroom when the line for the women's restroom is too long, and places like the police force where they have to lower the standards so women can qualify. Women invade male spaces all the time, and usually follow it up with griping about how they're oppressed in the space that they invaded the second the woke feminists get there. But why is diversity now such a big deal when it comes to the Grace Hopper celebration? A convention of only women is not very diverse.
This year is the first year where there has been an insane amount of men who went, and they're not going to listen to the sessions and learn. They were there just purely for the career fair.
I see. The unemployed girlies are mad because they were so focused on going to these amazing panels that they didn't think to do what they should have been doing, which was trying to get a job. That's a major reason that attendees go to these kinds of business conventions. The conventions are there for companies to advertise, and attendees to network and find employment.
Again, the men who attended went to barely any of the sessions to listen to the women speak about issues like underrepresentation in tech, the importance of inclusivity. Instead, they went straight to the career fair.
I like that she doesn't get the irony of being mad that they skipped a panel on inclusivity. I'm sure those non-binary, masculine-presenting people really missed out on not going to that diversity and representation panel. Speaking of representation, do you know what company doesn't care about all this political crap? Reed Street Soap. All Reed Street Soap cares about is making sure that you have the coolest and best-smelling soaps that last long and have high-quality ingredients. If you don't know where to start, try our best sellers like the Wood Shop, Blue Collar Scrub, and the Arctic Wave soaps. Not only that, but Reed Street Soap also sells candles. And don't forget to check out the items for the fall season like the pumpkin spice soap. Check out Reed Street Soap by clicking on the first link in the description. Anyway, welcome to the Grace Hopper celebration. It's the latest instance of big companies babying women and lowering the quality of the workforce through affirmative action programs and diversity hiring. In a post-lockdown society where layoffs are rampant because it turns out that shutting down the world for 2 years is bad for the economy, people are now doing whatever they can to get work. This year, a bunch of alleged men decided to attend a women's convention by using a loophole and identifying as non-binary.
The only way to even get tickets to the event if you aren't already a woman is to identify as non-binary, which is fine if you are non-binary. But it's interesting that the large majority of the people that actually ended up in the event had name tags with he, him, and have no searchable history of identifying as non-binary.
I'm not sure if what he said about having to identify as non-binary was accurate, because this NPR article here said it was illegal for them to prohibit men from the convention. Though it is funny how the organizers framed it as, we need male allyship, as opposed to saying, we can't ban men because we don't want to get sued. But anyway, how does this guy know that the non-binary people lied to get tickets? They don't have to have a history of this, and they could have just felt like a he-him at that specific moment. I've been following this stuff long enough to know that you can change the way you identify at any time, whether it was 6 months ago or it was during the middle of the day at a tech convention. Congratulations, when you make a game with stupid rules that don't make sense, then don't be shocked if a bunch of people come out to abuse them. The best part is that as far as I can research, this doesn't seem to be a coordinated event. It was just a bunch of guys who needed jobs, so they tried to break the meta at the Grace Hopper celebration, which is a conference that's named after a woman who wrote a coding language who many modern feminists are using to say that women invented all technology and created the tech industry.
Keep in mind that the entire conference is named after Grace Hopper, who was a woman computer scientist and mathematician who paved the way for women in technology.
She paved the way for what? Were people saying that women weren't allowed to code then? As far as I've researched, there was no such limitation, and Grace was welcomed into the field. Considering that all this is framed in a discriminatory context by feminists, I wouldn't call that paving the way. Jackie Robinson would be an example of paving the way for black people to be involved in professional sports. One crucial thing about that story is that Jackie Robinson played the same baseball game as the other players. He didn't ask to be given 4 strikes instead of 3 because he was black, which is why his presence in the MLB improved race relations instead of diminishing them like affirmative action does. He was also a very well-ranked player. The difference between him and modern feminists like the ones at this tech convention is that all modern feminists do is ask to play an unfair game where women have all sorts of advantages over men, which not only harms the relationship between men and women, but it's filling the space with low-quality employees who aren't competitive and only know how to say they're oppressed.
We have very limited resources in this space. This is one of those few limited resources that isn't for you, it's for us. I don't really need to go into that anymore. If you're a woman watching this video, don't let this bring down your confidence. The reality of the situation is these companies have paid big bucks to fulfill a certain quota of women that they need to hire. If they spend all their time with the guys at the conference, they're not going to meet enough women that they need to hire and fill these quotas. Whole reason they paid so much money to be there is to hire you guys.
How in the hell are you oppressed with limited resources when you just said that companies are going out of their way to spend big bucks to recruit women and are creating diversity quotas, meaning they're saving a spot for an inferior employee who can't compete on a level playing field, which ultimately just encourages people to not work hard to achieve a goal, and it's extremely insulting to all the women who were able to get a job without being a diversity hire, because they will get roped in with the women who couldn't. So women are oppressed, yet get to have diversity quotas, and companies are spending tons of money to fill said quotas. This is despite the fact that female employees at these companies will admit that women don't really care to be in these tech fields.
It's clear in the sense of, like, even in college, like my upper division system programming class had basically, I was partners with one other girl in my project group, but the entire discussion were just guys. And like, if you miss class, people would know if you miss class. And so super male dominated field, it's kind of intimidating to try to compete against everyone else and feel comfortable in your own shoes, that you pick the right field, right?
That was a member of Google's trust and safety team. You know, trust and safety, the totally not Orwellian branch of big tech that we all love. So she's going to say that women are oppressed because lower number, when in fact, college is a place where you can study whatever you want. There's endless promotion to get women into STEM, and more women attend college than men. Yet they are still in the minority in these fields. That's not oppression, that's lack of interest. At this point, they're spending money trying to essentially conscript women into fields they don't naturally want to do. Great, uninterested participants are always the highest quality candidates. And not only are these people at the Grace Hopper celebration running yet another affirmative action scheme which promotes sexism, but they are also fully treating the women at this event like children. This next clip comes from Bo Young Lee, the advisory president of Anita B., which is the organization that runs the Grace Hopper celebration.
Hey y'all. I want to address all that I've been hearing over these days at GHC. This is my third GHC, my first as part of staff, and it's always been joyous. In the past, it has always felt safe and loving and embracing. And this year, I must admit, I didn't feel this way. And I know that many of you felt the same. Many of you are feeling unsafe, physically and psychologically, and you're feeling unheard. I do the work I do to create a world where my two girls can thrive. We try to create a safe space. And this week, we saw the outside world creep in.
This week, we saw the outside world creep in at the convention. What? Isn't this convention supposed to be preparing women to thrive in the outside world? If it's not doing that, then all the women who spent roughly $1,000 to $2,000 in admission and travel expenses to go to this event wasted their money. This NPR article further talks about the feelings of the attendees by saying, the organizers subjected women and non-binary workers to a familiar feeling of needing to compete with men. Okay, the tech industry is mostly male. In what context did you ever believe that you would be exempt from competing with men? Do you think Grace Hopper, the person this event is named after, would be happy to see an event in her name supported by a bunch of big tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook that is babying women by promoting diversity hiring and safe spaces? Did these people do any research on Grace Hopper before using her name to promote their ESG bullshit? Calling the conference the Grace Hopper Celebration is also a very ironic title, because after watching a bunch of interviews, it's very apparent that Grace is a humble lady who would not want to be celebrated. Grace was a woman who joined the Navy and went through boot camp at 37 years old to help out America in World War II. During her tenure, she worked on computers, a task that she had to perform at a time when people didn't know what computers were.
Now, how did you know so much about computers then?
I didn't.
How
I
did
was
you?
the first one.
Yeah.
In fact, I had to learn a lot of things. One day, Commander Aiken came around to my desk and says, "You're going to write a book." I said, "I can't write a book." He said, "You're in the Navy now." So I wrote a book.
You had to write a book, and that was outlining the entire
Manual of the computer.
Yeah. And
What a process.
She had to just figure things out with little or no guidance because nobody knew anything, which is something I doubt this snowflake convention is teaching women how to do. And she's famous for helping develop a computer language called COBOL, which required that she work and compete with a number of men. Imagine that. I think this woman would be rolling in her grave to see the attendees at this conference being represented as girlies.
In the spirit of being here for you girlies.
Girlies who need to be treated like absolute entitled children in order to get a job. Back to Bo Young Lee.
This makes me angry and it makes me sad, but mostly it makes me want to fight. We're not fighting simply because of the concerns you express, but because that's our mission. Our mission is to uplift and celebrate women and non-binary technologists.
How exactly are you going to fight this? You put yourself in a really strange position by allowing people to register as non-binary. How do you know which ones are lying and which ones are being honest? The same issue is brought up by this guy here.
I think companies need to have a serious discussion on flagging every single resume of these dudes who decided to crash Grace Hopper and making sure that they shouldn't get any interviews. And no, I don't think that's extreme at all.
Except there were long lines where recruiters were meeting at least dozens of people, maybe into the hundreds, and they aren't going to remember who was who. With that said, how do you solve this problem? You won't be able to sort genuine non-binary people from the fake ones, and you can't just trash all the resumes from non-binary people, because that would be homophobic or whatever. One thing I did notice is that the alleged liars were all of a particular category that the women who were mad did not seem shy about pointing out. So you could throw out all the resumes of Indian and Asian non-binary people, but now you're a racist, and that's probably also illegal employment discrimination. You guys really put yourself in a pickle here by adding non-binary to the registration form. And you can't remove it because that would be homophobic or anti-LGBT, and even if you did, since trans women are just women now, the same guys can say that they're trans in the next event, considering that you can also identify as trans or not trans whenever you want. There are plenty of people out there who will do anything to get a job, so get used to this exploit being used regularly when it's allowed. And look what I found on the Anita B website. AnitaB.org unequivocally condemns and denounces the rise of vicious anti-non-binary and anti-transgender hate speech that has occurred this week as a byproduct of the events that took place during the 2023 Grace Hopper celebration in Orlando, Florida. It is violence, it is harassment, and it must stop now. Well, that's really awkward, considering that it was primarily the Anita B staff who are not affirming the gender of many of the attendees at the event.
This is supposed to be a joyous event that centers around you. Yesterday, it became clear that there are a far greater number of cisgender men attending than we had anticipated. Simply put, some of you lied about your gender identity when you registered. And as evidenced by the stacks and stacks of resumes you were passing out, you did so because you thought that you could come here and take space to try to get a job.
For one, cis is a slur. Normal people don't want to be called cis, just like Latinos don't want to be called Latinx. And I don't want to be called straight-sized by the fat acceptance community. The correct term is healthy weight, not straight-sized. Second, this is extreme hate speech. How dare this man Colin White misgender and invalidate these non-binary people? It sounds like this guy is practicing J.K. Rowling levels of turf bigotry and needs to be canceled immediately before he causes more harm to the non-binary and trans communities. But don't worry, because this guy has the circumstances in which men are allowed to participate.
We need male allies. We need men who want to celebrate women, who want to work with and for women. And so we welcome men in this space, but to learn and support and improve.
Yeah, you can attend our event if you act like a white knight simp who is only here to learn why men are evil and how women are oppressed. Dissenting opinions and feedback aren't allowed. And finally, this guy here, Colin White, moves on to a suggestion that sounds a lot like it's breaking the law.
Unfortunately, some of you took discounted academic tickets from women who need them. Some of you are taking interview slots right now while disciplinary is going on for women who need them. Some of you are standing in line to talk to recruiters instead of letting women speak. All of those are limited resources to which you have no right. So let me be perfectly clear. Stop. Right now, stop.
So you're holding interviews and you're saying that you can't go apply for a tech job at Google or Vanguard. Of course, Vanguard is at this ESG-friendly event. But saying that a person at your event can't hand out a resume because of their sex sounds a lot like employment discrimination and a violation of the Civil Rights Act, particularly because these were paying customers who were spending up to $1,000 to $2,000 to attend your event, and you're saying that they can't receive the product that they paid for. It sounds very illegal to gatekeep them from the service they paid for, provided that they followed the rules, to which you can't prove they didn't. Also, how are diversity quotas not a violation of the Civil Rights Act? It's literally discrimination based on sex for no reason other than we don't want a man working this job because there are too many of them. It has nothing to do with merit or the quality of the person's character. I will give the Grace Hopper celebration some leeway, though, because some of the men were reportedly pushing people out of the way to get in line for the career fair. If that's what went on, then that's not right. However, ultimately, what these affirmative action practices and diversity hires are going to lead to are more situations like this, where people will start refusing to work with women or hire them.
Hi, my name is Maya Milusheva. I'd like to start with a short introduction about myself. I'm a woman in IT, obviously. I'm a CEO of a quite profitable IT company. The whole talk about women in IT is usually a bad thing for us. Because basically what it says is, well, it's okay to have lower income, it's okay to do worse than boys in the IT industry because, well, there's a world conspiracy against you, you know, people hate you, that's why. And when I tried to do some recruiting, I intentionally wanted to recruit women. And at the end, I failed to do so. Do you want to know why? Because most of those girls were usually just cheating and they were just not good programmers. At the end, I had to recruit boys. And that's why I think the whole talk about let's recruit more women is bad, because at the end you're recruiting worse programmers.
Again, these ideologies where someone gets an advantage because they were born a certain gender are increasing prejudice. And it makes sense because affirmative action promotes lackluster performance, and the kinds of people who follow this ideology love to make up all kinds of nonsense to get out of working.
So I just got yelled at for asking a very reasonable question. So I'm applying to go somewhere, and I just wanted to know, are there accommodations for people who struggle with time blindness and being on time, you know? And then the person I was with interrupted and acted like I was asking something else, and then when we were done, they actually started yelling at me and saying that accommodations for time blindness doesn't exist, and if you struggle with being on time, you'll never be able to get a job. You know, provided you're trying your absolute best to be there. And then they're like, your stupid generation wants to destroy the workplace. And yeah, I think that a culture where workers are just cut off because they struggle with being on time, when there's other solutions that we can look to, I think that just anybody who thinks it's okay to just treat people like that, yeah, that culture needs to be dismantled. And then I asked that person, how can you feel good about yourself upholding this kind of system? And then to think I'm entitled. No, if people think it's okay to treat others like this, that's entitlement.
What world does she live in where she thinks it's okay to show up late to a job every day? I'm not a sociopath who doesn't care that another worker has to stay longer because I showed up 30 minutes late today. I have time blindness. Why can't they accommodate me? Being an asshole is not a disability. When you're trying to convince someone why they should risk their business to hire you, you have to ask, is it easier for them to adjust to me, or is it easier for me to adjust to them? Most times, it's going to be easier for you to change, so just go ahead and do that instead of expecting everyone else to adjust to every insane nuance of your personality. You'll be a lot more likable if you do that. It's moments like this that make me really confused as to why there was such an uproar from big leftist YouTubers when I made this video about affirmative action in video games. It's so obvious that all this stuff does is make people weak snowflakes and increase sexism. Do you really think the term safe space exudes strength? Do you really think that creating conventions or writing articles with the premise that women are too weak to compete with men is an empowering message? I'm not saying that there shouldn't be spaces that women can gather amongst themselves. Honestly, I think woke people constantly forcing integration into every community is annoying. Let people have some personal time. But when that personal time is set up to give your group advantages, as it denigrates another group, and it's supported by major banks like Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, and American Express, that's a problem. Didn't Americans collectively decide that this was a problem 60 years ago? Also, the irony of women being offended that their space was invaded by men, yet any suggestion that men should have their own spaces is met with a bunch of name-calling and the use of the word bigotry. You can't have it both ways. Either segregated spaces are okay, or they aren't okay. If you're going to say that men can't have their own spaces, then women's spaces shouldn't be allowed either. But more importantly, none of this nonsense actually helps people get jobs. There's a reason why the men were skipping out on the panels, and that's because most of them were useless discussions like, where are the executive women of color in tech? Beyond diversity, or make your visuals count for closing the gender gap in tech. I'm not paying over $1,000 to see nonsense like that when I can just go to the Anita B YouTube channel for free and get my fill of that kind of content. Look, this video has over 100 views after 3 weeks, so you know a lot of people are interested. So I ended up looking through the agenda and found out that panels that would actually help you get a job were in the vast minority. Here's one about resumes. Honestly, if you're relying on a resume to get hired, then I think you're looking in the wrong direction because nobody wants to read and there's nothing spectacular about a black and white piece of paper. If you want your resume to stand out, then hire a graphic artist to decorate it and format it attractively. There are all sorts of ways to do that in a word processor. Maybe this panel would help you see what hiring is like from the perspective of the employer? That might affect how you go about interviews, I guess. Though again, honestly, I've been to a lot of conventions that had panels with decent titles that ended up sucking, so the chance of this 45-minute panel not consisting of 10 minutes of introductions and microphone issues, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A because the speakers ran out of stuff to talk about, is very low. VidCon was probably the worst offender of this when I went a bunch of years ago. They had a lot of how to be a YouTuber panels where you ultimately learn nothing because the panelists had no idea what made them successful. The way you actually get a job is to first and foremost be attractive. People are very superficial, and a large portion of whether you get hired or not will be based on how you look and present yourself. Fortunately, if you're in tech, then you're around a bunch of people who don't know how to make themselves look good, so your competition on one of the most important fronts is very low. You can learn most of the basics of being attractive from this video here that I recently made. Second, you have to think outside the box, don't do what's easy like filling out an online application, and don't do what everyone else is doing. Surprisingly, one of the TikTokers who complained about men showing up at the event actually gave some very strong advice. Let's hear what she said.
Another strategy that would work really, really well. Instead of standing in line with these recruiters for hours, there's tons of the most brilliant female engineers walking around these rooms, standing around their booths, who are not recruiters, but have still come with their company to the conference. Network with them. Ask them about their job, ask them about their company, ask them what they like about it, and write it down. Try to note down something very specific about that conversation so you can stand out in the email that you're going to send after the conference. Actually pay attention and have a unique enough conversation about them. They're definitely going to respond to you. They're going to be touched that you took the time and effort to have that conversation with them and reach back out. And the obvious next thing they're going to do is connect you to the recruiter for the job.
I was shocked to hear this. Someone who actually knows how to get hired. Obviously, we aren't at the convention right now, so you can ignore the specific context of what she said and think more about the essence of what she was saying, which was to find any excuse you can to meet the people who will be hiring you and the people you'll be working with. That's how you can apply things more generally, depending on which job you're looking for. Though the convention grift is a great excuse to meet people at a company that will hire you, and there are a lot of these business-type conventions around, so in that case, take the advice from the previous clip and modify as needed. The third thing you do to get hired is to make sure that you are actually good at the skill that you're being hired for and develop your skills constantly. Networking isn't everything. I know this seems obvious, but there are so many people out there who are bad at what they do, so you need to practice your trade to be considered valuable. And all the better if you can display your skill to the recruiter before the interview, like those Unreal Engine YouTube channels that were basically just a giant billboard saying, "Hire me, game developers." In conclusion, you're not oppressed. Do these things and you'll get a job. Always keep looking for employment even after you get hired if you want a good salary. And usually, the people who sit around and complain are the ones who suck at what they do. Anyway, thanks for watching. Follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.